This is Reverend Kevin Knox, your host for the Pastors Academy podcast. Today I have Reverend Thomas, Pastor Thomas, as he's going to be sharing with us some of the outreach that he has experienced and the great response that he is receiving from his community outreach. I understand that your mayor has already come by to visit the church because he's heard about your ministry. So Thomas, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, if you would, please.
Like most churches, we're here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm the pastor of Calvary Hilltop United Methodist Church. And we would do school lunches for kids, especially during the summertime or after school. And of course, when schools shut down, we worked with our provider to be able to pivot, to be able to do lunches during the day. And then as more and more sites closed down, we ramped that ministry up. So we've had to put in obvious, 6 feet away protocols, transfer protocols, but things like that. But I'm a huge call and response, lament and the good news kind of thing. And we've had lots of folks get unemployed in a very short period of time. So Amazon, restaurants, grocery stores that had backstock that didn't know what to do with it because not all items are easily sellable. So we've actually opened up a whole food pantry, a no questions asked food pantry that's primarily delivering fresh fruits, vegetables, meats to elderly and vulnerable in our community. And so part of that is connecting with those folks through social media, through many different outlets to try to connect with them and bring them in to kind of a newer version of community that we're all experiencing.
Okay, let me interrupt you. Talk about some of the details. How did you get your food pantry supplied?
It's honestly just community, right? So we had someone who said, hey, look, they normally drop off some of these food items at food pantries, and those food pantries were closing down because they were primarily volunteer-based by vulnerable populations, elderly, retired folks. And so through no fault of anybody's own, it's smarter for those folks to say. So we found some younger volunteers and we were just able to bootstrap this whole thing. And then we started getting shipment after shipment. A restaurant found out what we were doing on social media. They were closing down. So they cleaned out all of their bread and all of their meat. And so it just grew because I think it came out of the spirit that works inside of the grace movement and the Holy Spirit's movement, that people want to help. And when they found out that a church was giving away food, they didn't want to throw it away. No one wanted to throw anything away. So how could they get it into somebody who was getting it out the door? And I mean, we were turning it out the door in 24 hours. Now it's about 48. We have a little bit more of a stable system now. But yeah, it just literally was word of mouth and the spirit of movement.
So you basically have a smaller congregation. So now you have community members who are even helping you come into the church to distribute the food?
Yeah, that's correct. So I want to emphasize that one, my wife's in the medical community. She's a doctor, pharmacist. We were planning for this for about a month ago. So even during voting, we were on the news talking about some of our protocols and how we were worshiping even before our governor of Ohio laid down some of these protocols. So 6 feet away, we don't touch surfaces. We quarantined off the church property into 4 corners. So that way, if anything or anyone should get sick, that entire place is quarantined. We have cleaning supplies, lots of different things. So I want to emphasize that we have masks, that we are very well prepared to interact with folks who are vulnerable. We have a transfer table. We have sanitizers. So I really want to emphasize this is not some guerrilla operation. We were very intentional because I have a vulnerable congregation and population, but they still wanted to serve. And I really wanted to meet my people where they were. They have a heart for the community. We have a heart for community as a church. And so how can we do that while keeping people safe, limiting the amount of time that we are interacting with the community? We only do it for an hour. We do it outside. We have tents. We don't allow anyone to come onto the campus. Our campus is quarantined, if you will, to outside folks not involved in the ministry. But to answer your question, yes, we do have folks that are not involved in our congregation that have come, been trained. They follow our protocols, and it is a way for people to serve. A lot of retired teachers, teachers that have been furloughed, folks that are in a position where they want to help. And we are one of the few locations people are allowed to move unless you're going to the grocery store or the pharmacy or to an essential needs store, the church is considered essential. And so it allows people to feel that there's something to do once a week. We really limit the amount of volunteers that we have on site at a time for obvious reasons with square footage. So, about once a week, we invite some folks to rotate on and off. And we do it Monday through Friday, every day out front of the church.
So we have people coming by the church to get food as well as you make deliveries, I believe.
That's correct. So we want to keep our seniors and vulnerable folks indoors. So we've come up with a couple of systems. One is we have a block captain. And so what we do is we drive the food materials off to that block captain, and that block captain, we offload it into their driveway, and then that block captain goes around the neighborhood to their folks that are vulnerable and elderly and puts it at their door. So we're not going door to door. It really decreases the amount of transportation. Plus, we want ecclesia. We want the church active in its place and space. And there is no better person than someone who lives on that neighborhood. So we've identified streets with a lot of folks that really should not be going to the grocery store. And so we've had those block captains essentially be able to do it. So yeah, we use the church van and we have somebody else's van and we drop it off. And we're hoping to expand that. We put in a couple of grants because again, now we've limited our grocery store here in Ohio. This is the beginning of April, whenever you're listening to this. But right now, they've limited the amount of people who can go in a grocery store, which means there's a long line outside. There's a line inside when you check out. And so folks are already not great at standing or moving, shouldn't really be going to the grocery store anyway. It just puts additional burdens on some of our most vulnerable folks.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out to the community. It's incredible. One of my favorite quotes has something to do with that. Our community members should be able to write a letter recommendation on how the churches respond to their needs.
I appreciate that one. And the other one I love is, if your church disappeared tomorrow, would the community miss you?
Yeah.
Right. And we've had so many churches, especially here in Ohio, shutter up. And I don't know if all churches can answer that. I would hope that our community would miss us as well.
I'm sure they would. So let me put you in a hard spot. And I have to admit this, Thomas, but there's other pastors who are listening who may be thinking, okay, how can we do this? Could you have any pointers or suggestions on how another church who has not had a month's head start to maybe get involved in helping the hungry, the community?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily the hungry in the community, but I'll answer your question directly, though. I think if you're on the other side of this, which is you haven't closed yet, you want to connect with your local restaurants who will anticipate closing and let them know you'll take whatever they'll take. We're fortunate enough to have an Amazon hub here, and Amazon is very generous with pushing food out to local food banks and local folks. And so some of these are long nested relationships that we have. But I'll probably step back a little bit more and say, listen to the cry of lament in your community. There's got to be something that is unique about your place and space, that there is a cry of lament, and you can go, I think our church can do something about that. And I think the listening part is the most important, because how we ended up with the food is someone called me and said, hey, I know you give out meals for kids. Will you take food? And of course, I'm going to say, yes, I'll take food. I'll figure out how to get rid of it. And it just kind of grew from there. And I think it's because I picked up the phone and I just listened, and I listened to a colleague who said, hey, look, we're in this situation where my pantry shut down. My situation is different. And I think that's going to be the spirit of how the church adapts to this, is because we're going to hear new cries of lament every time there's a new news cycle that comes out. And I think we have to be nimble like we've never been nimbly before, as a church and as pastors. I mean, we're going to screw this up, and we're all going to do the best we can, and we'll figure it out.
Well, that's a good point. A lot of us are out of our comfort zone. We're called to do things now that we've never seen, or even don't even know how to look up for the opportunities, I guess, that are out there for ministry. So listening to the lament, like you said, I appreciate that. Any closing words you'd like to mention, Thomas?
No, I think that, you can't be afraid to fail, overall. I think a lot of times, we want to be the bedrock, and we don't want to, and I think the church should be the bedrock. I think we should be a place of stability, but I grew up in New Orleans in a disaster area. Sometimes you just have to do things, and they're not going to go smoothly. They're not going to go well. They're going to fail at different portions. it sounds like my food ministry is going amazing. No, it's a rickety cart that is flying down the road, and someone dropped off 200 pounds of ground beef one day, and I had no freezer space. And in a day, I've got to figure out a way to get rid of 200 pounds of ground beef. And so it was a rickety cart that we're trying to figure out. And I think, I don't think Moses had it all figured out when he's trying to travel through the desert with all of the people. So, I think there's a great book by a friend of mine, and she entitled it "Be Bold," right? And so, and I think that's true where pastors need to be. Don't be afraid to fail. No one's going to write you up. No one's going to fire you. I think hearing the cry of lament and letting know that there's good news out there, I think that's the most encouraging thing I can tell people to do. You don't have to start a food pantry, but be bold and don't be afraid to fail. It's okay. We'll all figure it out.
Perfect. We'll be doing the right thing. Thank you very much, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. Talk to you.
Thanks for listening to the Pastors Academy podcast. Please like and share this episode so that other pastors can appreciate it. Thank you.